everyone. Welcome to the Calimesa Insider Podcast. I'm Will Coble, City Manager for the City of Calimesa, and we've got a pretty exciting program for you today. Joining us later on the program will be our Fire Chief, Tim O'Connell, and he's going to be on to talk about homeowners insurance and fire risks within the city. That's been a subject that has been talked about a lot in the city. We've heard it at the staff level, the council members have heard it from various people in the community about concerns, and that's something, it's a greater conversation because it's not just happening in Calimesa, it's happening all over California. We're in a crisis with insurance, whether it's homeowners insurance, auto insurance. So we're going to have the chief on to talk about some of the things that the city has control over and some of the things that the city doesn't have control over. So I think it's important to understand the city's doing what it can, and the chief is going to describe exactly what we're doing, but also understanding that there are plenty of obstacles, there's plenty of barriers that we have to go through. So he'll be on to talk about that later. One of the things I do when I record this program is I go back and I try to listen to things or I go back and listen to the show. So every time I record an episode, I listen to it to make sure that I got my point across, that I make sure that I didn't misspeak on something. So if I need to clarify something, I can do that. And so I did want to clarify one thing on last week's episode. So we talked about the grab-and-go meal program at the senior center and the fate of Assembly Bill 2410 that was meant to try to legislatively fix the program so that it can be continued into the future. However, what I didn't make clear is that the program is still going on. It's still ongoing. It has not been canceled. We did get word that they were going to cancel it last year. That never happened, and it continues to this day, and we haven't had any communication in months that would indicate that the program is going away. However, there is still a fix that is needed. So we're going to be speaking further with Assemblymember Wallace's office next month, the staff is, to discuss next steps to ensure the program will continue. They're very, very engaged and concerned about this possibility, so they want to make sure that the program continues for our community. So we will continue to work with them to try to come to a solution. It might just be something as simple as going to the county, having a conversation with them, clarifying some things so that the program can continue. Because it's our understanding that up to 25% of meals served in a program can be grab and go. Now, if it's on a per site basis, then that probably wouldn't help us too much because we don't get much attendance at our congregate meals. But if it's countywide, then obviously Calimesa's program is working well. You leave that one alone. You maybe cut back so that you keep the overall program at 25%. So those are things that we need to clarify. We're going to talk through, and we're going to meet with county staff to make sure that we're all on the same page and that maybe, just maybe, we don't need a legislative fix right away. It's not as urgent, and we can make sure the program continues. But obviously, we want to make sure that things are buttoned up and that we're good to go well into the future, because this program isn't going away and it shouldn't go away. So just wanted to clarify that, but it is still going on. So I don't want anybody to think that, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to get our meals. You'll still be able to continue to get your meals, rest assured, at this point anyways. But we are still continuing to work on it to make sure that continues. We did have a council meeting this last Monday. It was very well attended. I believe it was because a lot of people were anticipating the Oak Valley North hearing, which, as I stated last week, was continued to September 23rd. So if you're interested in that subject, please attend on September 23rd. Now, I will say that in the next couple of weeks, I probably will address some specific things, not with the project necessarily, but some of the processes. And again, I think there's still a lot of confusion out there in terms of how our land use process works and how we have to process projects and how they come about, why they come to council. So I think it needs to be discussed again. We talked about it at a land use workshop. We talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but I'll read some of the comments that we've been getting in relation to the project that are more related to the process. Again, I don't want to go into the merits of the project because I think that should be saved for the public hearing. But I think that in terms of process, because the process can apply to any project, not just this one, I think it's important for people to understand why these things come forward. It's not going to change anybody's mind in terms of whether they like a project or not. But I think that staff sometimes gets unfairly targeted, and even council gets sometimes unfairly targeted for these things even making it to council for hearing in the first place. The reality is that in many cases, it has to come to council. There is no choice. It has to. So I just want to talk about that. We'll talk about that in future episodes. Firefighter paramedic Art Hernandez received a commendation for his life-saving efforts at the council meeting. It was presented by Chief Tim O'Connell. That was pretty cool. We also introduced our new public works superintendent, Kyle Comey, so we were glad to have him on board. The city council approved the city's housing element and a related amendment to the overlay zone, the residential overlay zone. We described that in last week's podcast, so if you're interested in that, just go and listen to last week. So, towards the beginning of the podcast, I talked about that. The city council appointed Councilmember Linda Molina as the city's voting delegate at the League of California Cities conference in October. And the city council approved an increase to city council compensation from $300 per month to $700 per month, effectively an inflation adjustment from when the $300 a month was established in December of 1990. And that pay increase will become effective after the November 2024 election. So that's a recap of what happened at our city council meeting. Again, if you want to watch that in its entirety, you can find it on the city's YouTube page. Okay, now, joining us on the program right now is Chief Tim O'Connell. Chief O'Connell began his public safety service career in 1982 with the Big Bear City Fire Department and is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Chief O'Connell transitioned to law enforcement in 1991 and served in various investigative assignments, including 17 years in SWAT. He also served as the director of the Frank Bland Regional Training Center. Chief O'Connell returned to the fire service in 2015 and was hired as a fire captain with the city of Calimesa in 2018, promoted to battalion chief in 2019, and was appointed the city's second fire chief in February of 2022. Chief O'Connell holds a master's degree in public administration and a Bachelor of Arts in criminal justice management. Chief O'Connell also holds several professional certifications, including a California Peace Officers Standards and Training, or POST, Management Certificate, the California State Marshal's Chief Fire Officer Certificate, and is a graduate of the Sherman Block Supervisory Leadership Institute. Chief O'Connell has been a recipient of 2 medals of valor and a medal for life-saving. Chief, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Happy to be here. Good morning.
So one of the things that we hear a lot about from our residents are the changes in homeowners insurance. Either their homeowners insurance are going up dramatically or they're being canceled altogether. And we see a lot of headlines on that. We see various very large insurance companies just leaving the state. And, obviously there are a lot of factors that go into it. So I wanted to bring you in today to talk about what some of those factors are and really dive into what the city can control and what we don't have control over, and how minute or into the details that the insurance companies get to. Because we hear some residents saying, well, because this one property owner next to me doesn't cut their vegetation, therefore my insurance is canceling me. I think we can both agree that the insurance companies are not getting down to that level of detail, right?
Right. We're not taking that deep a dive.
Right. So let's just get into all the different aspects that go into why we are in the situation that we are.
Okay. And I'll lead off. Look, as a fire chief, as all of fire chiefs in the state of California, we're perplexed. We're painted into a corner. There are things occurring with fire insurance cancellations, and our ability to control and our ability not to control, and our limited choices. So kind of lay out a couple of things first. So right off the bat, we're going to look at fire hazard severity zone mapping, and we'll compare and contrast that against how our insurances for our residential homeowners and even commercial businesses were normally regulated. And it used to be controlled exclusively almost through the ISO, or insurance services offices, determining rates and giving ratings of a 1 through 10 for local communities, almost exclusively. And the fire hazard severity zone mapping, and I'll come back to the ISO in just a second, but the fire hazard severity zone mapping really takes into account wildland-urban interface and wildland-urban intermix considerations to identify risk or risk areas as it relates to wildfires and the effects on communities. And just to kind of give a history, those concerns have been in California going back to the 50s. There was the Bel Air fire, which is a significant fire, Oakland Hills. In the last several years, we saw what happened in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, and the town of Paradise. So those significant incidents play a role into some of the consideration for fire hazard severity zone mapping. So I'll leave that there and go back to ISO. So ISO insurance service offices used to underwrite, and again, 1 through 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best, a Class 1 department or a Class 1 rating. It's like the city of Los Angeles, and it's generally based on your fire department, concentration, distribution, and reliability for services, takes into training, equipment, apparatus, and water supply. And so to give you an idea, the city of Calimesa is a 3/10 or 3/X based on all of those rating items and in the suburban area, all the way out to the rural or semi-rural areas is where we get that 10 rating.
I was just gonna emphasize one point on that. We've always been in that kind of realm, correct? It's not something that's just brand new in terms of us having our own fire department versus being under CAL FIRE, correct?
Correct. We inherited that. When we took over shortly after the city established its own fire department, ISO came in, did an evaluation, and we were exactly where we were when the county had it. Now, having said that, based on development, potential growth, and preparing for the future, it's my belief, and we're headed for the direction. We're going to increase that, and we're shooting for a 2 or better in the next rating period. But really, one has nothing to do with the other. So you got the ISO rating for municipal services, response times, apparatus, equipment, training, water supply. So the fire hazard severity zone mapping, and I'll just say that effective April 1st, 2024, the state responsibility area, also known as SRA, mapping was established. It came out. In the city of Calimesa, because it's a local municipality, just as the city of Yucaipa is, just as the city of Beaumont is, because we have our own borders, we're a municipal city government, it's referred to as LRA, Local Responsibility Area. Those map works are coming. The state considerations have not been established yet. The information's forthcoming and going to be considered. The last map that was created for the high fire severity zone maps, and I'm going to talk about the different types of areas in a few minutes. The last map was completed in December of 2009. So we're a little outdated. It's new it's due to be refreshed, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that these fire hazard severity zone mappings are mandated through the Public Resource Code, sections 4201 through 4204, the California Code of Regulations, also known as the CCR, Title 14, I believe it's section 1280, and then California Government Code sections 51, 175 through 89. That's 51175 through 51189. And it determines the stipulation, or it identifies the areas, moderate, high, and very high severity zones. And it compares and contrasts and makes a distinction between wildland areas and non-wildland areas, and gets into what we refer to as the WUI, wildland-urban interface, and then in some cases the intermix. And just to touch on that really quick. So interface, if you look at a subdivision today, and the subdivision butts back up against what would have been open area wildland, and there's kind of a drainage or a separation, that's interface. Intermix is when we're actually building homes in the middle of rural areas. An example of that really is some of our areas in the Oak Hills area. That's a good intermix. An interface is what we see in Singleton Heights and JP Ranch. That's a good interface area for a good example. So establishing those fire hazard severity zones is based on risk, probability versus estimate potential for fire activity. Science-based being taking history of the area with fire history into consideration, terrain, slope, the fuel types, vegetation, all the way from grass all the way up through timber. The weather's considered, wind patterns, and all of that is combined into a metrics that really establishes not just what is going to burn, how it's going to burn, in what they call perfect alignment. So perfect alignment fires, if you have the wind, weather, slope, and the fuel in perfect alignment on the perfect day, you're probably going to have your worst outcomes. But the biggest consideration and versus wildland area versus non-wildland area is a consideration of ember cast and how firebrands travel. And that's a large portion of what is being considered today that probably was not considered as much in years past, again, based on those significant fire incidents that we've seen that I referred to up in Northern California, even San Diego County. So that's kind of some of the history and the reasoning, establishing what fire hazard severity zones look like, ISO, those considerations, and the governance that requires fire departments to make these considerations, and then the outside effect that we're seeing with the insurance industry. So all of those are kind of what we're seeing in this new kind of anomaly, and it's resulting in insurance companies reassessing risk that's affecting consumers across the board, including myself. And that's what we're seeing today.
So I think that that's one of the things that I want to explore a little bit is that, the insurance companies obviously are reacting to the risk, but there's also the insurance commissioner's office that sets the regulations of the insurance companies, and they're obviously looking at these risks as well. And so there's certain requirements that they're mandating, and it seems that they're trying to react to these increases in prices by saying, okay, if homeowners do X, Y, and Z, or areas do X, Y, and Z, that you are required to reduce your insurance rates. That external force is a factor in those insurance companies either saying, we're not going to play by the rules, we're just going to risk it and not listen to you, or we're just going to pull up shop and leave California altogether. Is that a factor in this as well?
It is. There's a lot of variables that go into what you just lined out. And some of the things, that, again, that are frustrating is what can we do? What can fire chiefs do? So I'll take, for example, the approach that the city of Calimesa takes. So historically, you have fire prevention bureaus with a fire marshal or deputy fire marshal, and we go out and do inspections. The state does drive-by inspections, and we do what's referred to as weed abatement. So we can drive around and assess risk based on the municipal code, based on what would be considered defensible space. And just to touch on that really quick, the tenets of that are changing a little bit. What used to be 0 to 30 is now being redefined, and there's legislation in the works to consider 0 to 5. And when I talk 0 to 30 or 0 to 5, it's from the wall of your house to 5 feet away, and or a wall of perimeter wall of your residence or business to 30 feet away. So legislation is changing there from 0 to 5 considerations, 0 to 30 considerations, and then out to 100 feet away from your structure. And taking fuel reduction steps, home hardening, all of those things historically had either been codified, mandated, or suggested. And and that seemed to have helped until recently, like you're stating. Insurance underwriters are coming in and they're either playing ball and insuring you, or they're not. They're choosing to pull up stakes. Leaves fire chiefs historically and city governments where we could take action and make reasonable suggestions. It's anybody's guess as to what the insurance company may or may not do. And just to touch on that a little bit, it's such a strong problem that our neighboring county, San Bernardino County, has petitioned and is seeking an injunction of some sort and pleading with the state insurance commissioner to forego and to reconsider the steps that have been taken. And they're really kind of taking the lead, the tip of the spear on that, to try to get some reasonable inside oversight and some changes because it's affecting so many people.
Yeah, and that is a huge thing because, again, we're at the local level, we are the most responsive branch of government, right? And that's where people come to first, because the state, especially in these, the insurance commission, it's kind of an obscure office. We kind of hear about it every 4 years when the insurance commissioner runs for election, and people are asking, who are these people? But these are the types of impacts that can have, and so it's good that San Bernardino County is taking that step to try to look at these things and try to do something about the problem, because I think that this is a pervasive problem that we face. But at the local level, we're told that we do these things and these are the expected outcomes, and we're not always seeing the results of that. So, what are the things that we can control, and what are the things that are actually getting traction to those things, and what are some of the things that we don't have control over?
So I'll start with your last part. What we don't have control over are the state mandates, and specifically the unfunded state mandates. When it gets handed down and it's either codified or adopted by the state and it's pushed down, and we've adopted municipal codes, either we comply or we're not compliant, and then we weigh out as a city municipality what's the risk versus the reward of complying or not complying. Outright, what can we do? Going back, and I don't necessarily like to focus on what we can't do, but what we can do. And outright is the public education model. And we talk about it. I've talked about it several times in council. I try to put it out there. I feel like I sound like a squeaky wheel. I bring it up almost every council session or every other to remind the public they have the ability to make public comment. And I'll go back to the SRA mapping that was just recently put into effect back in April. Public comment went through the Office of Administrative Law through the state before the Fire Hazard Severity Zone mapping was adopted. And public comment opened and closed multiple times. It was unheard of. People were being heard. And I believe that it had an effect. To what the totality looks like, I don't know. But it was definitely odd that public comment usually opens once, maybe twice, but 3 times or 4 times was absolutely unheard of. So the public responding and speaking out is absolutely necessary and key to reconsider the direction that government is going to take. What can we do? What should we do? How do we do this? So my recommendation, I'm just cutting to the bottom line, is some things that we can do locally. So we, as a city, have adopted the concept of community risk reduction. We have a comprehensive weed abatement program. We're fully engaged in public education and then engineering and enforcement. And we go out and make contact continuously. Taking that concept as a broken windows approach with the city government, with our public works partners, school districts, fire department, public works. Anyway, we'll take a look and identify risk, and then go have those conversations. And I think we're very accommodating. That number one. Number two is we're at a point now where if you and I'll refer folks back to go look at some of the information themselves. If they go to the Office of State Fire Marshal, and you can take a look at the Safety elements are the real estate defensive space inspection forms and/or take a look at the NFPA FireWise and Fire Safe communities. We need a grassroots committee to build a FireWise or Fire Safe community to be considered to reduce those high rates and/or to get those considerations. That cannot be driven. It's almost got to be. It's a grassroots community-based forum with their own governance model, and they identify it's about a 3-year process. What are the steps that we need to do as a community to impose or comply with a FireWise or Fire Safe community and implement that? And we need to do that.
And once they actually establish that, we can go in and help them and assist them. We can provide resources to help them, but it has to be kind of that grassroots effort that people, I know you've actually talked to individual residents about that very thing. I think you've identified some people that would be good candidates to get that kick started because they have a real passion for that kind of thing. They're invested in the danger, correct? And so, but we can still help along with that, kind of as kind of just giving some support, some backup, but they have to be the driving force, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And once they establish the committee, and then and then come up with reasonable objectives and basically a business plan, and where we can come in and then we partner is now once that FireWise or Fire Safe community is established and they identify their objectives and create their business plan, then what we can do as city staff and support is we look for those opportunities for funding that we're not eligible for. We can go out and look for grant funding to offset, mitigate, fuel mitigation, the different things, the education, the extra dollars that are needed to support those programs to get the resources in to reduce fuels and to establish barriers in the wildland urban interface and or some of those fuels problems that we otherwise we don't have we just don't have the funding to be able to do on our own.
So let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about development. That's another key area that we hear about is that, wait a minute, we already have these problems with existing homes and we have this wildland urban interface and even intermix, like you mentioned, for Oak Hills, which absolutely is the case. But as we go forward with development plans that are already on the books or potential development proposals, a lot of people point to the fire risk and saying, how can we build this in such a high fire risk area? Let's talk about that a little bit. And, you and I talked about even before we started recording this, there's a little bit of irony to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely there is. First of all, we need to take a step back and look where we live. Southern California is essentially a desert. The city of Calimesa, we're in the foothills of the San Bernardino National Forest. We're in the gateway of the San Gorgonio Pass. We have diurnal winds, that's onshore and offshore winds. We have wind patterns. We have elevation. We have fuel types. We live where we live and we work where we work. We can't change that. Getting into the planning phase and talking about planning, whether it's residential, commercial, semi-industrial, and we get into general and specific plan outlays, one of the major considerations in those specific plans and we in the amendments we take a look at fuel modification. So we will take a look and if we're going to build at the base of a slope, mid slope, or upper slope, then we take fuel height, slope, terrain, all of those considerations, and when we design extensive fuel modification plans. However, here's the irony: you're literally trading one fuel type for another. Just because you're removing native vegetation and replanting and creating buffer zones, you still have homes or buildings that need to be hardened and defendable. But we still can't control Mother Nature. The wind is still there, ember cast is we still have those things that we have to combat. So it is really an irony. You're trading one fuel type for another, and then coming up with a plan to try to mitigate risk.
Right, but I think that the building codes, though, especially when you look at buildings that are built today, whether they're homes, industrial buildings, commercial buildings, things like that, compared to things that were built 20, 30 years ago, they are hardened, right? And they're required to be. And you're trading one fuel type for another, but the fuel type that we're putting in, we actually have more control over, right?
Absolutely. So construction materials, construction types. We don't have gable vents with open, dormers. We have enclosed eaves. We're trying to discourage people from having combustible materials within 5 feet of the residence. We're really taking a smarter approach to building in the wildland and applying that, and we're applying it across the board because of what we're seeing in the science and the data from these big tragedies that we've seen up and down the state of California.
Yeah, and you look at the communities that were impacted, especially in Santa Rosa and in Paradise. Part of the devastation was because they were built to older codes, right?
It was, and we face that now. We have legacy Calimesa, and we have the newer, the newer homes and the developments, Singleton Heights, JP Ranch, and yet to come, the developments on the west side of the freeway.
But can those new homes, especially let's say on the other side of the freeway where you have Mesa Verde, you have the future phases of Summerwind, can they actually almost act as a buffer for those older homes because they're built to such more stringent standards than they were in the past?
I believe so. We take a look at fuel, ground cover. We talk about fuel height, arrangement, and then maintenance, and then we build in green zones, wet zones, so to speak, and I believe it is helpful. We just need to make sure that we maintain them, and I believe it is a deterrent. It's a bare lot with light, flashy fuels is definitely more of a threat than a manicured yard. There's definitely ways to mitigate and to reduce some of those impacts.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, I think that obviously, when people buy in an area like this, I think that there is, as you stated earlier, there is some inherent risk. When you want to live in a more rural community that does butt up against the foothills, there's a reason you moved here. There's beauty. There's different factors that make you want to live here, but that always comes with risk. There's always a trade-off, right? There's always a trade-off where you want to live. If you want to live in a highly urban area, you may have easy access to all your shopping and conveniences and things like that, but you also have to deal with traffic. You also have to deal with air quality. And out here, you might have to drive a little farther to get to your supermarket or your Costco or things like that. But you're trading that for that rural atmosphere. And that's one of the risks that you're taking too, is that you're going to have a more higher risk of fire.
Yes. And, as we see it, the LA and Orange County basins, they're built for all intent and purpose. People are traveling this way. Our population density, our population's increasing, our homes, the building is increasing. We're going to see some things with that. There's going to be trade-offs with circulation, with access, but we're doing it smartly, and we're looking at road widths, and we're looking at water distribution, and the arrangement of the fuel and the building types, just as we talked about. In residences, in residential areas, boxing in eaves and doing the smart things to prevent some of the catastrophes that we've seen up and down the state. We gotten away from shingle roofs, and wood-sided homes. There's things that we're doing through engineering and building codes that are helping to mitigate some of those issues that we've seen in other places.
So, are there any resources that we can share with the public in terms of some of the things that we have talked about today and things that they can start doing now to try to drive these changes and drive these improvements?
Yes, and we can get on the internet. Everybody should, or just about everybody should have internet access. And
Well, I think if they're listening to this program, they probably are, right?
yeah, I would hope. But I would view the California State Office of State Fire Marshal and type in community wildfire preparedness and mitigation. And they can view the east and west Riverside County very high fire hazard severity zone mapping, and there's links that talks about home hardening, defensible space, and it's got the metrics and the specifics related to the science and some good video clips so that you can understand exactly where the codes are coming from. And the codes that I mentioned earlier, again, I would go back and take a look and look at the codes and where they come from and why. And, this has been going on for years. It seems like a few years ago there was the campaign, The New Norm, with climate change. And I think our wind, weather, and our fuel growth patterns are definitely something to take a look at. It seems hotter and drier. I've been through a few droughts, being a lifelong resident of Southern California, and see those patterns. Yeah, I think we're coming out of the top of a drought. We had a couple of wet years before, and now we've seen this year a lot of fuel per acre. The grass is definitely a bumper crop, so to speak. But yeah, go back and take a look at those land use planning, safety element drop downs on that Office of State Fire Marshal website, and give yourself some idea how to be educated and how to prepare your home.
So, just bottom line is that people think that because the neighbor or the field across the way, because they still have weeds, we're not doing anything about it. We, like you said, we're actually taking a very holistic approach. Despite the fact that we have a small staff, we're still going out there and making that a priority because we understand that we do live in a high fire danger zone. But that's not going to probably do much to impact their home insurance rates. That's not our motivation. Our motivation is to try to keep our community safe. Obviously, a good benefit of that would be for the insurance companies to either stay here or reduce their rates. But at the end of the day, we live, like you said at the beginning, we live where we live, and that's going to be part of the deal. And it's something that's going to be bigger than us, something that we're trying to work hard and try to be a voice to try to make the change and try to improve things. But at the end of the day, it's not something we can just do unilaterally on our own.
Yeah, and you said a lot going back from living in our neighborhoods. It's inconvenient, it's unsightly, and it's unsafe to not keep your yard, and it's frustrating. I've personally lived that experience. I had a neighbor that refused to do anything to upgrade the property. Not only is it blight, it's dangerous, and I used to dread it if there was a fire there, how it's going to affect me and my neighbor. So I understand that. The complaint process is arduous. I like to remind people that we have the U.S. Constitution that's on our side, and we have municipal code. And if you have a problem property, make a complaint. Call. Don't be ambiguous. We'll go out. We'll make contact. We'll educate the property owner. There's a process. And yes, to your point, if we take enforcement action, it really doesn't have anything to do with the increase or decrease or cancellation of your homeowner's policy. It's much larger than that. But call us. We'll take the steps. It's a lengthy process. It's 60 days, at a minimum of 60 days from the time we receive a complaint before we can even consider taking action. And then legal action goes back through the city attorney and the enforcement and abatement process can take up to 90 to 120 days. And that's just by law. That's the process. But we're actively engaged in it. You're not going unheard. Make the complaint. We'll contact you. We'll keep communications open and work through that process.
Right. I think that's what people, you mentioned the U.S. Constitution. We have that on our side, but also those property owners that you're complaining about also have it on their side too. It applies to everybody.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's what is frustrating is that, people, code enforcement, and weed abatement is a branch of code enforcement. It absolutely is. And I think that, code enforcement is one of those things that either people want more of it or they don't want any of it. There's no happy medium. It's like, oh yeah, you're doing just about right. You're either not doing enough or you're stomping on people's rights. You can't get anywhere in the middle, it seems like, right?
That's the dichotomy, right? So either stay off my property, leave me alone, don't tell me what to do, or hey, go make that guy clean it because it's unsafe. There's no happy medium,
right?
Ever.
Right. Anything else to add on this?
No, I'd like to thank all of those people that are out there. We have a lot of engaged community members that are compliant without having to be told. I encourage folks to call me directly. We've got Deputy Chief or Deputy Fire Marshal Jerry Rodriguez is overseeing our Fire Prevention Bureau. Make the calls. We're working in lockstep with not only Public Works, but planning and engineering, and we're trying to make our community safe.
Thank you for joining us, Chief. And thank you to all of you out there listening for being here today. That's going to do it for this week. I think it can be emphasized also that the volunteer programs that we have in the city are abundant. And if you have concerns about public safety, whether it's fire, homeowners insurance, or even, police services, things like that, rather than complaining about it on Facebook, you have the opportunity to come out and actually make a difference. You can volunteer for our Citizens on Patrol program. We're really trying to push that program and get more people involved with it. It's down to only a few members, but we definitely want to have that program going so that we can have regular patrols of our COPs. They are the eyes and ears for our public safety personnel, whether it's fire or code enforcement or police. And so, take that opportunity, take the bull by the horns. You have the opportunity to do that yourself. We will provide you with uniforms and training. We'll provide you a vehicle. We just ask that if you do it, you don't get involved. You're not going to actually enforcing anything. You're just going to be the eyes and ears, and it'll help our deputies really target their patrols and get them to where they need to be. Because they can't be everywhere at once, as we know. Even if we added more deputies, they still can't be everywhere at once. But having those volunteers it's like a force multiplier and really allows our deputies to focus on other things, maybe more higher level crimes, things like that. So please, 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 if you're interested in volunteering, please contact City Hall and we'll get you the details and we'll get you signed up for that. Our podcast is available on a number of different platforms. I know I talk about this all the time, but I haven't listened to them all in a while. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, including Alexa, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Overcast, Podcast, and YouTube. If you want to listen on another podcast app, just copy the RSS feed and plug it in there. Just a heads up also, there will be no meeting on the first Monday of September, so the next City Council meeting will be Monday, September 16th at 6 p.m. This is the Calimesa Insider Podcast. I'm Will Coble, and we will see you next time.